A story of grumpy solitude, unexpected pestering, and a heart rekindled. Silas MacAllister, a man whose 72 years sat as comfortably upon him as his worn flannel shirts, had cultivated a post-retirement existence of profound, almost religious, quietude. His log cabin, more fortress than home, was nestled deep within the verdant embrace of the Olympic National Forest, a place where the ancient cedars and Douglas firs soared to cathedral-like heights, their branches perpetually dripping with the moisture of the Pacific Northwest. Here, the air tasted of damp earth, rich loam, and the exhilarating tang of pine, a constant, soothing balm to a soul that had seen its share of human folly and wild grandeur during his 40 years as a park ranger. His days unfolded with a predictable, almost monastic rhythm, a deliberate contrast to the often chaotic demands of his former profession. Mornings began with the precise ritual of brewing strong, black coffee, its aroma mingling with the cool, crisp forest air that seeped in through the cracks in his old cabin. He'd sit on his wide, sturdy porch, his grizzled Basset Hound, Old Duke, a creature of boundless size and profound naps, sprawled at his feet. Together, they'd watch the mist unravel from the valley floor, revealing the intricate, moss-laden tapestry of the temperate rainforest below. Afternoons were devoted to the meticulous maintenance of his property, chopping firewood with practiced, efficient strokes, mending fences, or tying intricate fishing flies with calloused but surprisingly nimble fingers. Evenings found him by the crackling warmth of his stone fireplace, the rich scent of burning cedar logs filling the cozy cabin, as he delved into well-worn natural history texts or simply listened to the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock, a relic from a life now deliberately left behind. Mac had seen countless bears in his lifetime, from lumbering adults to tiny, squeaking cubs. He respected them, understood their power, and maintained a healthy, professional distance. Wildlife was to be observed, documented, protected, but never, under any circumstances, interfered with, certainly not domesticated. He had no illusions about the wild. It was beautiful, yes, but also harsh, unforgiving, and utterly unsentimental. After his wife, Eleanor, had passed quietly in her sleep 5 years ago, the silence of the forest had become his preferred companion, a vast, unbroken symphony that absorbed his grief, leaving him with a stoic, if somewhat lonely, peace. He had, with characteristic fortitude, embraced his new independence, finding a fragile solace in the self-sufficiency of his isolated existence. But sometimes, especially in the long, rain-soaked evenings, the pervasive quiet felt less like solace and more like a cold, aching emptiness, a stark reminder of the shared laughter and whispered secrets that once filled his small world. It was a particularly blustery autumn morning, a thick, insistent drizzle falling from the perpetually gray sky, promising a long, wet winter. Mac was painstakingly sharpening his favorite axe, the rhythmic rasp of stone against steel filling his small woodshed. Old Duke, nestled in a pile of sawdust, let out a soft, contented groan. From the dense undergrowth just beyond the shed, where the meticulously cleared yard yielded to the wild forest, a series of profoundly strange and utterly captivating sounds drifted. It wasn't the familiar, frantic chatter of squirrels, nor the mournful hoot of an owl. It was a sequence of high-pitched, insistent whines, punctuated by what sounded suspiciously like frustrated huffs and tiny, remarkably indignant snorts. His heart, usually as steady as the mountain itself, gave a sudden, unfamiliar lurch. It was the unmistakable sound of a bear cub. And it was impossibly close. Mac, a seasoned ranger whose understanding of wildlife was honed by decades of direct, often dangerous, observation, knew immediately what a lone cub meant, a cub in dire, almost certainly fatal, trouble. Mother bears were legendary for their ferocious, unyielding protectiveness. A cub separated from its sow was almost certainly orphaned, abandoned, or irrevocably lost. His mind, trained in the unyielding logic of ecological systems, registered a familiar pang of concern, a professional regret for the inevitable. Yet, his scientific discipline and years of ranger protocol cautioned against any form of direct intervention. Nature, he reminded himself, was often unsentimental, sometimes brutally cruel, but it had its own inscrutable ways of balancing its scales. He quietly called old Duke to his side, his voice low and firm, keeping the old hound close, his ears pricked, and watched the dense green wall of the forest, his binoculars raised, his breath held. The sounds persisted, growing louder, more desperate, and increasingly expressive. Then, with a sudden, comical flurry of movement, a small, dark bundle of fur tumbled head over heels out of the thicket, tripping over its own clumsy, oversized paws, landing with a soft, undignified thud in a pile of damp leaves directly at the edge of his woodshed. It was, beyond any doubt, a black bear cub. Impossibly small, no bigger than a well-fed house cat, its scruffy, rain-matted fur clung to its tiny frame, revealing the subtle outline of its ribs. Its eyes, wide and luminous brown, blinked up at him from its prone position with a mixture of raw fear and something else entirely, a profound, almost human, and utterly comical exasperation. It pushed itself up, wobbled on unsteady legs, looked directly at him, let out a loud, demanding mrof. A sound Mac had never, in all his years studying ursine vocalizations, heard from a bear cub before, then promptly sat down, a tiny, defiant sentinel, and began to whimper, not with terror, but with what sounded suspiciously like a series of exasperated complaints about its situation. Mac stared, utterly dumbfounded, his sharpening stone forgotten in his hand. This wasn't just a lost cub, this was an aggressively, persistently vocal cub. It continued its dramatic monologue, a high-pitched, almost operatic chorus of whimpers, punctuated by sharp, huffy chuffs, and what sounded uncannily like frustrated sighs, as if narrating its entire tragic journey to him in excruciating, indignant detail. Old Duke, usually a model of wary discipline around wild animals, simply tilted his head, his long ears swiveling, a curious, questioning whine escaping his throat, as if asking Mac for a translation. The cub seemed to be telling him a very long, very complicated story of its numerous misfortunes, its struggles, and its unwavering opinion on the general unfairness of its recent predicament. He watched for hours, a silent vigil maintained from the shelter of his woodshed, scanning the tree line with his binoculars, listening intently for any hopeful sign of a mother bear, a distant rustle, a familiar grunt, a fleeting shadow. Nothing. The forest remained vast and silent, offering no answers, no reprieve. The cub, meanwhile, continued its dramatic, one-sided conversation, occasionally attempting to bat at a falling leaf with clumsy, uncoordinated paws, only to lose its balance, tumble over, and then right itself with a dramatic oof, followed by a shake of its head and a defiant umph. As if the leaf had personally and intentionally offended it with its unpredictable descent. It was clearly starving, its small body trembling with cold and hunger, but its spirit, and its undeniably persistent voice, seemed remarkably, miraculously intact. As the late afternoon drizzle gave way to a heavier, chilling rain, the cub's whimpers grew weaker, softer, tinged now with genuine exhaustion and growing despair. Yet, its talking had not ceased. It had, with determined effort, managed to drag its small body closer to the woodshed door, now sitting directly on the damp ground, looking up at him with those wide, luminous brown eyes, letting out a series of soft, mournful marrow grunts that pulled at something deep, long dormant within Mac's heart. His carefully constructed scientific detachment, his disciplined adherence to the cold logic of nature, crumbled. This wasn't just a wild animal in its natural habitat, this was a desperate, tiny life, actively, eloquently pleading for help. And it was so utterly, charmingly, impossibly goofy in its vocal, indignant despair that a reluctant smile, a genuine, unforced curve of his lips, touched Mac's grizzled face for the first time in weeks. He knew the established rules, the stern warnings from his former colleagues: do not feed, do not approach, immediately call wildlife services. But his remote cabin's satellite phone, old and perpetually unreliable, was stubbornly dead, a recent, unseen windstorm or a fallen branch likely severing the connection miles down the line. The nearest ranger station was a grueling day's hike away, an impossible journey with a fragile cub on the verge of collapse. This cub, he knew with a chilling certainty, wouldn't last the night exposed to the elements and potential predators. The thought, cold and stark, pierced through his professional rationale. "All right, little nuisance," he grumbled, his voice rough with a mixture of exasperation and burgeoning affection. "You certainly know how to make a point." With the slow, deliberate care of a seasoned ranger approaching a delicate specimen, he retrieved a shallow bowl of fresh, cool rainwater he'd collected and a small handful of plump, wild huckleberries he had gathered earlier that morning from a patch far from the cabin, carefully setting them a few feet from the woodshed door. The cub, after a moment of suspicious, almost theatrical, silence, cautiously approached, sniffed the offerings with a tiny, discerning nose, then devoured the berries with a ravenous hunger that spoke of days without sustenance. It paused only to let out a deeply satisfied, rumbling huff, before burying its face in the water, lapping noisily. Over the next few days, the cub became a permanent, and incredibly vocal, fixture in Mac's otherwise solitary life. He named her a Blabbermouth, a playful moniker that perfectly encapsulated the cub's incessant, expressive vocalizations. Blabby, for short, never, truly never, stopped talking. Every action, every fleeting emotion, every new discovery was accompanied by a distinct, often comical, sound. A happy, rumbling chuff-chuff when Mac appeared with food. An indignant umph when old Duke accidentally nudged her during a shared nap. A curious, questioning row whenever she encountered something new or puzzling, a shiny rock, a rustling leaf, a particularly perplexing reflection in a puddle. A deep, resonant, vibrating purr that emanated from her tiny chest when she was utterly content, curled in a sunbeam or nestled in a soft blanket. She was a furry, four-legged commentator on the world, a constant, endearing narrator of her own clumsy adventures, and her chaotic, often hilarious, antics were endlessly, helplessly amusing. Mac, with his deep, ingrained knowledge of bear behavior, knew the inherent dangers. He knew that habituating a wild animal to human presence was a grave disservice, potentially signing its death warrant in the wild. This was a temporary measure, a desperate, last-resort rescue. He kept a cautious distance, limiting physical contact to fleeting, necessary moments of medical assessment or food placement. He finally managed to get his satellite phone to sputter to life long enough to contact the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center, the signal crackling and fading, a frustrating link to the outside world. Dr. Anya Sharma, a pragmatic but ultimately kind and dedicated biologist from the center, listened to Mac's detailed, almost affectionate description of the cub's peculiar vocalizations with a mixture of professional skepticism and burgeoning intrigue. "You're sure she's that vocal, Mac?" Anya asked, a hint of amusement in her voice during a subsequent, more stable call. "A true blabbermouth, you say? We'll need to observe her closely. And no direct contact if possible. But her vocalizations, that's highly unusual. The main roads are still partially washed out, but we'll send a team as soon as possible." While waiting for the elusive wildlife team to navigate the treacherous, storm-damaged mountain roads, Mac continued his careful, indirect care. He meticulously selected and prepared high-protein kibble, mixed it with wild berries he'd foraged and precious fish oil, and left his offerings in designated spots far from the cabin, always ensuring Blabby was not directly associating the food with Mac's immediate presence. He wanted Blabby to understand that the food appeared as if by magic, a gift from the wilderness itself. But Blabby, with her uncanny intelligence and surprisingly keen observational skills, seemed to understand the true nature of their unspoken exchange. She would often leave Mac small, precious gifts in return, arranged with surprising neatness, a perfectly round, smooth river stone on his porch, still damp from the creek, a single, shiny pine cone placed precisely beside his axe, or once, a curiously half-eaten, surprisingly large mushroom, left with a proud chuff, as if presenting a prized, albeit slightly nibbled, trophy. The cabin, once a haven of quiet refuge, now hummed with a new, vibrant energy. Old Duke, initially wary and slightly bewildered by the tiny, demanding creature, had become Blabby's reluctant, yet endlessly patient, playmate. They would engage in comical, sprawling wrestling matches on the damp lawn, Duke gently pinning the cub with his large paws, while Blabby would respond with furious, playful growls and indignant huffs, before wriggling free and pouncing back with renewed vigor. Mac found himself talking to Blabby constantly, explaining his wilderness observations as he watched the rain fall, narrating his hikes as he explored the local trails, sharing long-forgotten stories of Eleanor, his voice finding new inflections, new warmth. The cub's constant, expressive responses, her predictable yet always amusing antics, made Mac feel less alone, less burdened by the oppressive silence of his grief. His heart, which had felt so tightly closed and guarded since Eleanor's passing, began to slowly, irrevocably open, warmed by the cub's boundless, goofy charm and her unwavering, vocal presence. Max meticulously kept ranger journals, once filled solely with precise observations of flora, fauna, and weather patterns, now featured delightful, often humorous, sketches of Blabby's daily antics, Blabby attempting, with great determination, to climb a towering cedar tree, only to slide down its rough bark with a dramatic whoosh, and a disgruntled umph, Blabby helping him in the woodshed by diligently scattering his neatly stacked kindling, then looking up with wide, innocent eyes. And a questioning row, as if asking for approval, Blabby talking to a perpetually confused squirrel, a long, rambling monologue of chuffs and grunts that sent the tiny rodent chittering in bewildered retreat up a tree. These drawings, infused with unexpected humor and a deep, burgeoning affection, were a stark, vivid contrast to the precise, detached scientific observations he usually made, reflecting a profound shift within his own grizzled spirit. The day the wildlife team finally managed to navigate the cleared mountain roads and arrived at Mac's cabin was a day of profound, bittersweet emotion. Dr. Sharma, pragmatic and efficient, spent an hour observing Blabby from a safe distance, utterly captivated by her unusual vocalizations and relentlessly playful personality. "You weren't exaggerating, Mac," Anya said, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips as Blabby performed a particularly clumsy pounce on a startled old Duke, who merely sighed in response. "She's quite the character. And remarkably healthy, considering her initial state. The team then efficiently set up a humane trap, baited with the irresistible allure of honey and fresh salmon. Mac watched, his heart aching with a familiar pang of loss, as Blabby, lured by the sweet scent, ambled into the trap, letting out a surprised, slightly indignant mrof, as the door clanged shut, echoing through the quiet forest. As Dr. Sharma efficiently prepared the cub for transport back to the rehabilitation center, Blabby, now secured but still vocal, turned her head, her luminous brown eyes meeting Mac's from within the cage. She let out a soft, mournful mroger, a sound that seemed to hold a world of confusion, a question, and perhaps a tender farewell. Mac felt a familiar sting of tears prick his eyes, blurring the image of the cub he had grown to love. "You'll be safe, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, ignoring Dr. Sharma's cautionary glance. "You'll be wild again. And strong." The cabin felt empty, profoundly, unnervingly quiet, after the drone of the wildlife vehicle faded into the distance, carrying Blabby away. The silence, once a cherished comfort, now felt heavy, oppressive, filled with the echoes of unspoken grief. Old Duke wandered restlessly, sniffing at the spots on the lawn where Blabby used to tumble and play, letting out soft, confused whines. Mac found himself instinctively listening for the familiar chuffs and huffs, his heart aching with the profound absence of that tiny, vibrant presence. The laughter, which Blabby had so effortlessly coaxed from him, had gone out of his days. The silence of his grief, which Blabby had so effectively, so joyfully, banished, began its slow, insidious creep back into the quiet corners of his life. But then, he looked at his journal, open on his desk, at the whimsical, goofy sketches of Blabby's antics, each one a vivid reminder of laughter and pure, unadulterated joy. He picked up the small, smooth river stone Blabby had left on his desk, its coolness a tangible link to that brief, magical time. He remembered the warmth of the cub's soft fur, the surprising weight of its small head against his hand during a rare, unguarded moment of weakness, the boundless energy and pure, unadulterated joy it had brought into his otherwise solitary existence. Blabby had not just been a rescued animal, she had been a profound catalyst, a tiny, vocal force of nature that had, without conscious effort, broken through the formidable walls Mac had so meticulously built around his heart after Eleanor's passing. A few months later, as winter's first chill began to paint the mountain peaks with white, Dr. Sharma called. "Blabby's thriving, Mac. She's gained significant weight, learning all the foraging behaviors, and yes, she still talks a blue streak, though mostly to herself now. We're planning her release next spring, with another orphaned cub we've rehabilitated deep in a remote part of the national park, far from any human contact. She's truly ready." Mac felt a surge of overwhelming relief, followed by a familiar, lingering pang of longing. "Will she remember?" he asked, almost to himself, the question a whisper of hope and longing. Anya paused, a compassionate silence on the line. "Animals remember kindness, Mac. In their own way." Spring arrived, vibrant and riotous, bursting forth with new life and the boundless promise of renewal. Mac, now more connected to the rhythms of the wilderness than ever before, often hiked with old Duke to a high, secluded ridge overlooking the vast, emerald expanse of the national park. It was a place where they could see without being seen, miles from the designated release site, a silent vigil maintained from a respectful distance. They never saw the actual release, an event conducted with utmost discretion by the Park Service, but they imagined it with vivid clarity, Blabby, robust and strong, her coat gleaming in the spring sun, bounding into the wild, perhaps letting out a final, triumphant mrof, as she embraced her freedom, her true home, her wild destiny. In the years that gently folded into one another, Silas MacAllister continued his quiet life in the cabin, but it was no longer a life defined solely by solitude. It was a life profoundly infused with the vibrant memory of a talkative bear cub, a life inextricably connected to the vibrant, pulsing heart of the wilderness in a way he had never fully experienced before. His cabin, once a mere dwelling, felt like a living, breathing part of the forest. His journals, once filled with the detached observations of a ranger, now contained lyrical prose and delightful sketches, each one a testament to the profound lessons he had learned from a tiny, vocal grizzly. He still hiked with old Duke, but now he listened more intently, not just for the familiar sounds of the forest, but for the elusive, cherished echoes of a certain chuff or an indignant umph. And sometimes, when he was out on a remote trail, far from his cabin, his mind quiet and open to the wilderness, he would find a small, perfectly round river stone placed neatly on a mossy rock, or a single, unusually large and sweet huckleberry left on a fallen log, its vibrant color a stark contrast against the rough bark. He never saw the giver. The forest remained vast and seemingly empty. But he would smile, a deep, genuine smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, and let out a soft, knowing mrof into the silent, ancient trees. His heart, once quieted by the profound weight of grief, now hummed with the vibrant, enduring melody of an unexpected friendship, a profound, almost mystical connection to the wild, and the joyful, indelible memory of a rescue bear cub who never, truly never, stopped talking. His life, once defined by loss and the quiet endurance of sorrow, had been beautifully, irrevocably reborn through the goofy antics and the silent, profound wisdom of a tiny, vocal bear. He was no longer just Silas MacAllister, the retired park ranger, he was a guardian of a secret, a recipient of wild grace, his spirit forever intertwined with the untamed beauty of the Olympic National Forest. He lived on, surrounded by the towering firs and the whisper of the wind, his heart full, knowing that in saving a life, he had truly, gloriously found his own.